Senator Jay. You will note that we have a lot of organizations that are here today and also some who are not able to be with us who are supporting these air quality bills. Behind me, you can see the logos of the many organizations who are supporting these bills. Today's event, the briefing, is an event that is co-sponsored by our legislative sponsors, the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Table, which is a coalition of grassroots organizations, environmental non-governmental organizations, as well as other allies who are coming together to support the efforts of environmental justice in the Commonwealth. And the Environmental Justice Table is co-convened by 5 fantastic grassroots organizations: the North American Indian Center of Boston, Green Roots, Alternatives for Community and Environment, the Coalition for Social Justice, and Neighbor to Neighbor. I see we have many legislators in the room today. Thank you all so much for coming, as well as to your staff. The coalition supporting the bill also includes the Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership, or STEP, as well as the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So without further ado, I'd like to again welcome you all. We're planning to be together until 11 o'clock today. We will have 3 panels of speakers. Our first panel will be our legislative sponsors, who will discuss the bill and why it's important to them and their constituents. Our second panel, the community panel, which is going to be discussing what are the impacts on air quality in their communities and why we need the air quality bill. And then our third panel is talking about the science and the law and why we need the air quality bill. We intend to leave approximately 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our legislators, and we're going to start with Senator Jalen.
I think that Senator Jalen may be here listed as Stacy Rubin, so I cannot find her.
I was muted. I was sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm just very excited to see this coalition and on this really important issue. And it's not something that I used to know anything about. And I'm so grateful to Ellen and Wig from Somerville, who have done so much work on learning about, on documenting, on explaining to us the dangers of people living next to I-93 in Somerville with no protection from the pollution that comes off of the highway. I started learning about it particularly because of the lack of what we thought of as sound barriers along one part of Somerville, but also about people who live in the Mystic Housing Project, completely unprotected from all the pollution rolling off of I-93. And the people that live in the housing project are obviously low income. They're primarily Black and Latino, and they face much higher rates of heart disease and asthma and many other conditions which we didn't know about. It's a silent epidemic. And the same thing happens along the States Avenues, which again has been, we're gentrifying fast, but it's a low income area of Somerville. So I'm just really grateful that we are beginning to focus on these things. But the other thing that I didn't know before is the dangers from gas appliances. And it seemed radical to me that we would be concerned about gas appliances. The more I learn, the more I'm upset that I have a gas stove and a gas dryer in my house. So I think we have two things to do here. One is to pass legislation, and the other is to educate each other and the public about the dangers of both pollution coming from automobiles and the danger of gas appliances in our own homes. So thank you all so much for educating me and educating others and making this possible to pass this bill. This is a strong coalition. I'm so proud to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Senator Jalen, for your leadership and for being here today. We have our next legislative sponsor who will speak is Representative Barber.
Thanks, Stacy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. And I want to thank especially the advocates for organizing this event today, and all of you for joining us here today. I'm Christine Barber, state rep representing Somerville and Medford, also honored to be a lead sponsor on this bill with my colleagues, Senator Jalen and Rep Connolly. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about some of the EJ work, which our experts are going to get into in a couple minutes. But we know Mass residents are exposed to air pollution every day by cars, trucks, planes. And we now know more about the science that the particulate matter from all of transportation increases the risk of developing numerous diseases, cardiovascular, asthma. It really affects the quality of life of so many people in our districts, especially in environmental justice communities. But the negative impacts, of air pollution extend beyond Somerville, beyond Chelsea, beyond Springfield, across the state. So in our communities, we need to really take this on and make sure that we are addressing the poor air quality and pollution, and specifically the negative impacts it has on our health and our well-being in our communities. So you're going to hear from experts about the science of some of the particulate exposure, and also from the many grassroots organizations around the state, from the EJ table, more than I will list, but BIPOC communities who are working with us around the Commonwealth to push this bill forward. And importantly, this bill addresses outdoor, but also indoor air quality. So in EJ communities, the air quality isn't just poor outdoor, but it seeps inside our buildings as well. I also represent the Mystics housing, the largest housing development in Somerville, which Senator Jalen just mentioned. And the air quality inside people's homes in the Mystics has alarming levels of particulate matter as well. So this bill would monitor air quality and collect data, but it would also improve indoor air filtration in places where there are high levels of pollution. And we would set targets to address the pollutants and improve air quality over the next 10 years. So specifically, we'd require air filters that would remove 95% of the harmful pollutants that are found in fossil fuels from our transportation. And we'd require air filters when people live right next to highways. Unfortunately, the highways are probably not going anywhere. So short of taking them down, we need to improve people's health and well-being. And I'm really excited to work with this coalition and all of you on this work. I think I'm going to pass it on to Rep Connolly to talk about another piece of the bill.
Well, thank you, Rep Barber, and good morning, everyone. It is so awesome to be here with this incredibly impressive coalition. It's great to be working in partnership with Senator Jalen and Rep Barber. As they said, this is an issue that's near and dear to Somerville, but it's also near and dear to so many environmental justice communities across our Commonwealth. We were really proud when we passed the 2050 roadmap bill, both last year and again earlier this year, that we really elevated the issue of environmental justice, but we know that we can go even further. And it's not enough just to elevate the issue. We really have to drill down, set meaningful targets, set meaningful requirements to protect the most vulnerable residents from the real harm that's being caused by air pollution and near roadway pollution and ultrafine particulate matter and all of the other dangerous substances that are caused by basically the combustible engine and gas, et cetera. And so, as Rep. Barber said, this bill focuses both on indoor air quality as well as outdoor air quality. It would really focus on the outdoor air quality of environmental justice populations by expanding the monitoring for black carbon, for UFP, and criteria pollutants in these hotspots. This monitoring really provides critical information that will enable the Commonwealth to set reasonable targets that need to be reached by the end of the decade. And just picking up on what Rep. Barber said, the installation of indoor air filters will really be critical in indoor spaces, schools, residential buildings with more than 2 occupied units, as well as commercial buildings with more than 5 full-time employees. So this is really about protecting our most vulnerable communities where they are at. Moreover, this bill would require air filters that would remove over 95% of the harmful pollutants commonly found in transportation fossil fuels. So I'm really encouraged by the momentum that we've gathered around this bill. And I think that, this really is that next step. I'm proud to say that we've taken climate action pretty much every session that I've been around, and even going back before my time in the legislature. We took significant action last session. And I think if we follow the news, if we follow the will of the public, we know that the demand and the necessity for further action is absolutely imperative. And I think this legislation is really teed up to be that next big step that we take in our Commonwealth. So grateful to continue to be part of this all-star lineup, and I'll pass it back to the host so that we can hear from our experts. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Representative Connolly and Representative Barber. Really appreciate our sponsors for working in partnership with us as advocates, and also getting others from the State House to pay attention to the issue. So we're gonna begin with our second panel, our community panel. So we have 4 speakers. We will have somebody from ACE, Green Roots, North American Indian Center of Boston, and the Coalition for Social Justice. And first is going to be Sophia Owen, staff attorney at ACE.
Thank you, Stacy, and good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Owen. I am the staff attorney and the director for EJ Legal Services at Alternatives for Community and Environment in Roxbury. We build the power of communities of color and low-income communities in Massachusetts to eradicate environmental racism and classism, to create healthy and sustainable communities and achieve environmental justice. And we support these bills because poor air quality is a life and death issue for our staff and our members. We've been working on air quality since 1996, when a student at the Phyllis Wheatley Middle School died of a severe asthma attack. And the student was diagnosed with asthma as an infant and lived near the MBTA's Bartlett bus yard located on Washington Street. His death opened the student's eyes to the problem of air pollution in Roxbury and caused REAP, our youth program, to begin working to stop dirty diesel emissions and to prevent asthma. In the following year, REAP students from 5 schools organized an anti-idling march from Eggleston Square along Washington Street to Nubian Station. Students ticketed city, state, and MBTA diesel vehicles that were breaking the state's anti-idling law, including buses at Bartlett Yard. In 1998, we created the Clean Buses for Boston Coalition to fight for healthier air by focusing on the MBTA. Today, this work has transformed the entire MBTA bus fleet to run on compressed natural gas or with diesel engines that filter out 90% of emissions. We're proud that Bartlett Yard closed in 2005 and that Boston's diesel emissions reduction ordinance was passed in 2015 as a result of our organizing and advocacy. But unfortunately, despite these local victories, Roxbury has an asthma rate of 15.7%, which is the second highest in the city. Black Bostonians are more likely to die from lung cancer than any racial or ethnic group, and Black bus riders in Boston wait at least 64 more hours for the bus than their white counterparts. As you'll hear from my colleagues, this is the experience of Black residents and other communities of color throughout the state. Now, you might be asking yourself whether current policies already address these issues, and sadly, the answer is no. Studies have shown that even if we implement policies designed to lower emissions from transportation, like the Transportation and Climate Initiative, disparities in air quality and pollution hotspots will continue to persist in 2032, and this is unacceptable. It's why we're supporting this bill, which will address these issues by ensuring that we're not only monitoring poor air quality, but mitigating the pollution. Data collected from an expanded air monitoring network throughout the Commonwealth to measure ultrafine particulate matter and black carbon in locations near roadways will allow us to set enforceable targets for emissions reductions, ensuring that pollution is diminished in hotspots and that air quality improves. I thank you for your time and attention and hope that you will support these important bills.
Thank you very much, Sophia. We're going to bring up our second community speaker, Sarah Arman from Green Roots.
Thanks, Stacy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to all the reps and senators for your work on this really important bill and for all of your work on environmental justice issues. And Stacy, thank you for facilitating today. My name is Sarah. I am a lifelong resident of Chelsea and the Health Equity Coordinator at Green Roots, which is an environmental and social justice nonprofit in Chelsea. And so today I just want to share why this air quality bill is important to me and my community. Chelsea is a transportation hub of the state because of its proximity to the Tobin Bridge and Logan Airport. Daily, there are 63,000 cars traveling on the Tobin Bridge and 37,000 trucks that pass through the city of Chelsea. They're headed to the New England Produce Center to bring produce to the rest of the region. And additionally, Chelsea houses 100% of the jet fuel for Logan Airport and houses around 70% of the region's home heating fuel. So while we recognize that this is really important work and we are so proud of our city for being essential to the rest of the region, this movement of cars and buses and trucks in and around Chelsea leads to a lot of pollutants, carbon emissions, and diesel particulate matter. In fact, Chelsea actually exceeds EPA diesel particulate recommendations by 20%. These environmental injustices lead to adverse health outcomes in our community. Short-term exposure to air pollutants can aggravate respiratory diseases, including asthma, but we know that there are long-term effects to pollutant exposure as well. Data from the Department of Public Health shows that Chelsea consistently has the highest asthma hospitalization rates in the state and among the highest hospitalization rates for stroke, heart disease, heart attack, and other chronic illnesses. In fact, almost 50% of Chelsea's population has one or more chronic health conditions. The physical and built environment, air quality, and pollution all have an impact on our community members' health outcomes, and it is time to protect Chelsea and East Boston and all environmental justice communities across the Commonwealth by mandating air quality improvements. Our community recently got new air monitors, and other pollution hotspots across the state deserve clean air and should have access to these air filters as well. Through this, we will be able to achieve a more equitable, more sustainable, and healthier community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I just want to remind everyone attending today that we are doing simultaneous language interpretation into Spanish, and our interpreter is doing a tremendous job. I just ask speakers to speak a bit slower so that our interpreters can keep up. So our next expert and wonderful speaker is Jean-Luc from the North American Indian Center of Boston.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean-Luc Purit. I'm president of the board of directors for the North American Indian Center of Boston, located in Jamaica Plain. We are Massachusetts' oldest urban Indian center. Indigenous peoples within Massachusetts are disproportionately impacted by the effects of outdoor and indoor air pollution. To date, the Massachusetts Cancer Registry has not disaggregated data regarding our American Indian and Alaska Native residents. Especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, Indigenous nations are committed to using traditional foods as an effective approach to health promotion, as endorsed by the CDC. In many cases, indigenous nations use their traditional lands for subsistence hunting, fishing, and harvesting native plants. In addition, the environment is often integral to religious and traditional practices. These expressions of self-determination are affected by increased exposure to pollutants. Indigenous nations statewide monitoring of long-term exposures to air pollutants, black carbon, and ultrafine particulate matter. One of the most important reasons that certain indigenous nations are actively conducting air quality monitoring is to gather information on the long-term effects on public health and traditional lands. The Wampanoag tribe of Aquinnah has a diverse air program that provides air deposition sampling and ambient ozone monitoring for its traditional lands and the Cape Cod region. The tribe operates air quality programs, and the data is collected and shared with both the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. In addition, the tribe is analyzing the contribution of deposition, that is, the air pollution that arrives to traditional lands from elsewhere. As fish and shellfish are important to tribal members, both culturally and economically, the Natural Resources Department of the Wampanoag tribe of Aquinnah has conducted studies of fish tissue to assess the impact of airborne pollution on tribal sustenance foods. As Aquinnah has few sources of air pollution, the air monitors and deposition and fish tissue analyses have helped the EPA better understand the transport of air pollutants. Indigenous peoples may hunt and fish off trust lands. While Massachusetts may put forward regulatory measures for conservation, those regulations must meet the additional standards of being reasonable and necessary conservation measures. Courts have developed key legal doctrines to explain Indigenous peoples' hunting and fishing rights off tribal lands, including the Reserved Rights Doctrine, the Necessary for Conservation Standard, the Fair Apportionment Standard, and the Appropriate Standards Requirement. NACOB is a member of the EJ table and believes this bill is a critical step to assuring the public health and safety of Commonwealth's over 94,000 residents who identify as Indigenous. This bill establishes a technical advisory committee, which will include community members to select locations for air monitors. NACOB further urges the inclusion of urban Indian populations, tribes outside of the current borders with historical government-to-government relationships with Massachusetts, and tribes that are not federally recognized under the guidance of the Massachusetts Commission of Indian Affairs. Tikach, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. And next we have our final speaker on the panel. We have Sabrina Davis with Coalition for Social Justice.
All right, everybody can hear me okay?
Can.
Great. My name is Sabrina Davis, and I am the lead organizer on the environment and transit campaigns at the Coalition for Social Justice. Just as environmental justice is social justice, so too is air quality. And we feel that your zip code should not determine the quality of your air. And while the new laws prevent new pollution from moving in on our EJ communities, there's still a lot of pollution that is there present that needs to be cleaned up. Just as my colleagues have mentioned, we're still suffering from a lot of air pollution. Today is not one of my better days. I have asthma, and this is quite common in my community. Before the pandemic, we had hosted people from our local high school, Durfee, and I, as part of making sure that they were safe when they went canvas, asked if anyone had asthma, and all of them raised their hands. So it is quite an issue in our community. It's difficult to do things when you're struggling with asthma. It takes time away from work. It affects what you can do for work, and in some cases can really limit your opportunities. And this is why this bill is so important. We can actually prevent children from getting asthma just by improving the air quality, because it's not all genetic. A lot of it is environmental. And that's why this bill is so important. All too often, our low-income people are suffering from illnesses that are completely preventable just by eliminating pollution. That's why this bill is so important, so that way we can start to heal our communities.
Sabrina, thank you so much. And we so appreciate you being here to share your amazing advocacy and personal story. Before we go to the question and answer session, I'm going to call up our third and final panel. So this is a panel where we're going to bring in people to talk about the science and the legal issues associated with the bill. So we're going to have representatives from Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Clean Water Action, and Conservation Law Foundation. We're going to start with Ellen Reisner, president of STEP.
Myself. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate being able to participate in this this meeting. I've been a research partner with my colleague Wig Zamor on the community assessment of freeway exposure and health, the CAFE research team, for 15 years. And our purpose has been to look at the effects of ultrafine particulate pollution on people living near highways and busy roadways. We are really happy to be in support of the Senate Bill 1447 and House Bill 2230 to improve both indoor and outdoor air quality for communities burdened by transportation pollution. Since our initial research funded by the National Institute of Environmental Health in 2006, CAFE has studied the health effects of UFP pollution in Somerville, Chinatown, Dorchester, Chelsea, and Malden. Our CAFE research team and extensive international ultrafine particulate research have found that people living near highways and busy roads carrying 25,000 vehicles or more per day experience cardiovascular, respiratory, and neurological health conditions due to the UFP exposure. In California, research has also shown that children living and attending schools adjacent to busy highways and who are chronically exposed to traffic-related air pollution experience restricted lung development as well. And there are also associations with childhood autism. It's a worrisome situation and certainly requires more research. Today, federal EPA regulates PM 2.5, which is a regional pollutant, and there are legislative protections associated with that, but it does not regulate ultrafine particulates, which are concentrated in the immediate vicinity of heavily trafficked roadways. And UFP exposure is an environmental justice problem because most people living along high volume roadways are lower income and people of color. The seriousness of exposure to UFP pollution is due to the fact that the pollutants are so small that they are immediately absorbed into people's lungs, blood, and brains. And the proximity to the near roadway pollution affects people not only outdoors, it affects them indoors because of the infiltration into their homes. Thus, this legislation is needed to require indoor air filtration. The proposed legislation should require MERV 16 filtration because these filters capture most ultrafine particulates and larger particles regardless of size. Lower rated filtration systems like MERV 13 are less effective. In Massachusetts, it's not possible to mandate quality filtration at the municipal level, although we have tried in Somerville because the state building code preempts local building codes. But the things that we can do to protect the health of people exposed to traffic-related air pollution are to focus on this both locally, regionally, and through state policy to protect residents from the near roadway pollution by establishing high energy air filtration and ventilation standards for new buildings by modifying the state building code, pushing for the International Building Code and Energy Conservation Code to require high efficiency of filtration in new and renovated buildings, to encourage use of portable filters in existing buildings as is now being done in schools because of COVID concerns. And most importantly, to locate housing, schools, parks, and health facilities away from busy roadways. We can't change what's already exists and the over 200,000 cars that go on I-93 pass by my neighborhood, but we can do something to protect people anyway. And I really appreciate being able to speak about this today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen, and for all of the work that you and others at STEP do regularly. And this is a continued reminder for speakers to be speaking slowly so our interpreters have an easy time doing the interpreting. Next, we have Sharon Ron, a public health planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Hi all, my name is Sharon Ron, and as Stacey just mentioned, I am a senior public health and regional planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. As shared by previous speakers, particulate pollution is associated with significant disease and disability, and filtering the air we breathe indoors is a leading option for reducing air exposure to air pollution. For this reason, today I want to share with you, one, why this bill's focus on home and childcare settings is so important, and two, how updating the building code is a leading option, is an investment in the well-being of our communities. The air quality bill focuses on housing and childcare centers. The reason for this is twofold. One, the home environment is critical when trying to reduce exposure to air pollution. The average American spends 90% of their time indoors, and the majority of that time is in their home. And two, children experience a disproportionate impact from polluted air due to their increased breathing rate and physiological development. They are therefore at increased risk of the diseases that we discussed earlier, specifically of concern, respiratory diseases, think asthma, and the neurological effects, think ADHD, autism, depression, slower information processing. The air quality bill would move to protect homes and childcare facilities by establishing high efficiency air filtration and ventilation standards for eligible buildings. It would set filtration standards as a condition of licensure and direct the Board of Building Regulations and Standards to upgrade building codes. Today, standard new building practices usually use filters that do not sufficiently remove fine and ultrafine particulate matter. So this bill would push for the updates as described by Ellen to include filters of sufficient quality, MERV 16. Nationally, there's precedent for this. Peer states have adopted codes which require quality filtration, either statewide or in areas most at risk. A leading example of this is California, which adopted requirements similar to those in the air quality bill for all residential and commercial construction through the energy portion of their building code. As Ellen spoke to, mandating stricter building code and standards is not possible at the municipal level in Massachusetts. Although groups like STEP, MAPC have explored using zoning code, this can be helpful. Zoning can be helpful for disincentivizing siting new housing or childcare facilities near busy roadways. It cannot regulate the detail of the structures themselves. Furthermore, municipalities are not able to amend the state building code. It really has to be done by a state body, and for this, we need your leadership. In conclusion, we are stronger and more prosperous as a Commonwealth when we act to support our well-being. We saw this with health insurance policy, with our ban of smoking in workplace, and I believe we would see this again through the adoption of this act. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Next, we have Paulina Casasola, the climate justice organizer at Clean Water Action.
Thank you, Stacey. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paulina Casasola. I'm here representing Clean Water Action and also the Environmental Justice Table. As my colleagues have previously mentioned, transportation emissions disproportionately affect low-income and BIPOC neighborhoods and significantly impact children at home and school every day. Residents of these communities should have access to tools that allow them to monitor air quality and opportunities to share their insight on actions that can be taken to reduce emissions. As we expand outdoor air monitoring for black, carbon, and ultrafine particulate matter, we need to build trust with local community leaders and neighbors to achieve equitable solutions to air pollution. So implementing a citizen science program to monitor and address emissions will allow us to gather and analyze much more data and make information accessible to everyone. Furthermore, residents are the experts in their communities. We need to ensure they are engaged in research processes and have opportunities to provide insight and expertise through community-based programs. A framework recently studied and implemented in California in 2018 by the California Air Resources Board showed that by having residents as active partners in envisioning, developing, and implementing actions to reduce emissions and clean up air in their communities, people can have access to transparent, collaborative partnerships between stakeholders and equitable solutions. So implementing a similar framework in places like EC or Somerville could be a great opportunity to partner with local organizations, churches, high schools, and gather data where folks live, work, and play as these residents take action to monitor the air quality. This framework can lead to better and more equitable solutions that encompass transparency, equity, and address the issues that youth leaders, mothers, and workers care the most about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulina. And I will be the final panelist or speaker before we open it up for questions and answers. I am Stacy Rubin, the Vice President of Environmental Justice at Conservation Law Foundation, or CLF. CLF supports the air quality bill because it fills a regulatory gap that is needed to protect residents living and working adjacent to congested roadways, active marine ports, and airports. It will also make a significant difference for residents of older housing where they are exposed to mold and other indoor air pollutants. During recent legislative sessions, the Commonwealth has made important strides in addressing environmental and energy pollution. With the 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act and Green Communities Act, the Commonwealth set bold greenhouse gas reduction targets and directed investments in building energy efficiency. Those laws have been impactful, yet air quality improvement in overburdened communities is severely lacking, as you've heard today. Low to moderate income residents, renters, and other environmental justice populations are still waiting to benefit from lower utility bills and healthy housing that were supposed to come with energy efficiency programs. Earlier this year, the legislators and staffers on this call and others successfully set pollution and greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets to fight the climate crisis and ultimately to protect our health through the roadmap law. That law is incredibly important, yet it fails to mandate air quality improvements in communities that breathe in diesel exhaust and mold spores. These prior legislative victories will not be complete until the benefits from cleaner air and a better environment are shared among all of our communities and reflected in our public health outcomes. I am an attorney, and I often get asked the question about whether there are any legal issues with this bill. Our team conducted legal research. We're confident that the bill would survive any preemption challenge. The Federal Clean Air Act bars states from setting air quality standards that are less stringent than federal standards, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. The air quality bill sets targets that are more stringent than the federal requirements and covers pollutants that are not addressed by the Federal Clean Air Act. Likewise, the Clean Air Act does not preempt any regulations that would be required to implement the air quality bill. The intended targets of the targets in this bill are ultrafine particulate matter and black carbon. These are two pollutants not regulated at the federal level. We've looked into sections of the Clean Air Act and the ability for states to set air quality standards and pollution reduction targets like those in the bill. Again, we have no concerns that there is going to be any preemption challenges. And if there are, CLF stands ready to take the case to court to protect the language and make sure that there are strong requirements for our Commonwealth and residents. I want to also note that the air quality bill addresses air quality in a very comprehensive way for both outdoor spaces and indoor spaces. While many of our commenters today have spoken about the exposure to transportation-related emissions, I also want to touch on mold issues. Several members of the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Table, particularly our members in Springfield, have repeatedly mentioned their concern about exposure to mold and the need for better mold remediation. In helping to draft the bill, we spoke with a number of members of boards of health. They seek a stronger state sanitary code that would allow them to enforce and take enforcement action against building owners who are failing to do mold remediation in a way that residents deserve and need. In particular, we've repeatedly heard about the mold issues at the Harena School in Springfield. This bill would help to address those concerns. The measures in this bill are bold yet necessary. They will protect residents from all districts across the Commonwealth, and especially those who have far too long borne the larger cost of pollution. Thank you so much. And so now we will open it up for questions and answers. Please feel free to type your question in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and raise your hand, please do so. And I'm going to start us off as I see that I'm not seeing questions come in at the moment. We've been getting questions as the coalition supporting the bill about the cost of the MERV 16 air filters. And so I'm going to put Wig Zamor on the spot to just give us a very quick thought about the overall cost of the air filters.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a colleague of Ellen's in Somerville, a co-founder of Mystic View Task Force, STEP, and the Community Assessment of Freeway Exposure and Health Research Program. And we have really done two different types of research in Somerville and the other metropolitan communities that Ellen mentioned, as well as Roxbury. The first is the association of the ultrafine particles primarily with cardiovascular disease, which is the most serious outcome. And then secondly, we have done a long series of studies of indoor air filtration, because both we and the Californians realize that filtering the particles out from indoors, where people spend most of their time, is the best way to reduce chronic exposure. And I did look a couple weeks ago at the costs, current costs, and they're about 1 or 2% of building costs or significant rehab costs. And building costs are pretty high. And relative to the health protection afforded, I think that's a pretty modest cost, given the extreme exposures in these really most highly polluted corridors and areas of the Commonwealth.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Wig, for answering that question. I'm also getting some private questions in the chat, which I very much appreciate. So the next question is, who do we think is opposing or do we expect to oppose the bill? And first, I want to turn it over to Cindy Lupi to try to answer that question.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, everyone. This is such a great discussion. My sense of this, and if any legislators are on and they have additional direct knowledge to add, is that as with most bills, our opposition comes from those who profit from our current state of inaction in terms of protecting communities from this type of pollution. I think that means direct representatives of the fossil fuel industry and their allies, which often include chambers of commerce and sometimes developers and realtor interests. In general, this is often about those who profit from the centering of fossil fuels in our economy, and those who want a healthier future and healthier air, particularly for our kids and for those most vulnerable. So it is a common state of affairs, I think, for all of us, and something that our community voices are working hard to beat back.
Thank you, Cindy. Rep. Barber, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can jump in too, and I totally agree with Cindy. I think that she's right on about kind of our typical opposition. The other piece of this that I see as a challenge is I think as we kind of started off saying, this is fairly new and groundbreaking research. I feel like in Somerville, the cafe work has been going on. We talk about it all the time. It's been really incredible, and we're very familiar with it, but it is still new, and we know our state agencies don't take air quality into account. I think it was mentioned, like, sound barriers for the highways, that's about sound. It's not about all the pollution coming off of our highways. That's not how the state thinks about our transportation system. And so it is still emerging in people's minds. And, I'm so glad to have this group on board and educating people, because it is going to take transformation and changing how we think about these issues to make sure that more folks are aware of just how dangerous to our health and to our well-being transportation is, of course, and to our environment as well. There's so many reasons that we need to address air quality, and I'm really glad to have this group there. But I think that is one of the challenges facing us.
Those were excellent answers. Thank you so much. The next question that we got is, when the new air quality monitors discover excessive black carbon or ultrafine particulates, what would be the remedy according to the bill? I'm happy to answer, but would welcome our sponsors to also jump in. So the bill would require additional new monitors, and in particular, those would be in air pollution hotspots. The bill would establish a committee that would be responsible for sort of estimating, based on existing data, who we think those spots are. And once the monitors discover that those are elevated levels, the bill says that we've got to reduce the amount of the particulates over time. So there's specific air pollution reduction targets over time, and there would be an enforcement provision that would allow either the State Department of Environmental Protection or what's called a citizen suit, sort of a private opportunity for groups to take action. So in particular, it's trying to track a bit of the greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets by setting air pollution reduction targets on similar timelines as the greenhouse gas emissions targets. Anybody else want to jump in on that one before the next question? Okay. The next question we got is, can the presenters say a little bit more about the health impacts of exposure to air pollution? Is there anybody who wants to take that
on? Scientifically or just experience wise?
I think, why don't you talk about experience and whatever science you want to cite to, Sabrina?
I can tell you from experience wise, especially because it's very much mixed with rising temperatures when we're dealing with smog due to heat, and that brings down that pollution, makes it thicker. I can tell you that I have an extremely hard time breathing and that I have to use my inhaler more often. And it's just a miserable experience overall. I can tell you that on the highway, I have to keep the windows rolled up because the exhaust and the fumes will make me physically sick. If we're idling, if there's like a lot of traffic where there's no air movement, it can come through the vents in the car, which makes it really difficult to breathe. So in regards to that, it's really difficult.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I'm going to call on, I think, two more people to answer this question. First, Paola Garcia from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and then WIG.
Sure. So some of the things that we can see in terms of negative impacts on health from air pollution include lung and heart ailments, asthma, diabetes, developmental problem in children, and also premature death. And I will add to the chat the findings of an analysis that we conducted a couple years ago, focused on Massachusetts, and some of the findings include that Asian American residents in Massachusetts are exposed to particulate matter concentrations from on-road transportation that are on average 36% higher than exposure of white residents. African American residents are exposed to 34% more vehicle pollution than are white residents, and Latinx residents to 26% more. So I'm adding to the chat the information on these findings from the analysis for more information.
Thank you, Paola. Wig Zamor, can you add something to this?
Yes, sure. I think many of you may remember that it was assumed in the beginning after the Clean Air Act passed that pulmonary would be the primary health outcome. But the Harvard Six Cities study of 1993, which was a pulmonary study, found in the 6 cities that they studied that the greatest health effect was actually premature cardiovascular mortality, which was a surprise. Since that time, it has become clear that all diseases of inflammation, and some were just mentioned, overlap with the part of the immune system that reacts to particulate matter. So particulate matter, through a quirk of evolution, which goes back 1 billion years, is interpreted by our immune systems, and I won't go into the details, as a biological threat. And there is a general alarm reaction. And so any other inflammatory conditions that you have, whether it's heart disease or lung cancer or asthma or diabetes, whatever their cause, there is a synergy that accelerates those other diseases, including both their short-term effects and their march toward premature death.
Excellent. Thank you, Wig. And we have one final responder to the question. I'll turn it over to you, Jean-Luc.
And thank you to WIG for bringing in the idea of the synergy and like the impact of like broader effects, because going back to the holistic methodologies from indigenous nations in regards to monitoring air pollutants, it's not just humans. It is also the wildlife, it is also the fish, it is also the plants, and it is indigenous people that are relying on all of those non-humans to go back to healing practices. That this is actually something that exacerbates the effects of diabetes within our community and so forth. So definitely there's a whole broader approach, and it definitely relies upon that synergy and the holistic methodologies employed within BIPOC communities. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate the thoughtful questions, the amazing support. And for those of you who are with legislators who are not yet co-sponsors, we'd welcome your ability to co-sponsor the bill. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.